The dusty wind of the frontier village swept across the open fields as 18-year-old Eliza stood before the small church, her trembling hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Her dress, though white, was worn and faded, borrowed from her late mother. Behind her, whispers filled the air, such a pity, marrying that old man for money. Eliza's heart beat painfully in her chest. She didn't want this. But when her father had fallen ill and the doctor said he needed medicine they couldn't afford, old Mr. Briggs, a wealthy ranch owner nearly 60, had offered to save her family. His price was Eliza's hand in marriage. Her father had begged her not to do it, but Eliza couldn't stand to see him wasting away. So here she was, standing before the altar, the church filled with people who pitied her, or judged her. Mr. Briggs stood beside her, tall but frail, with sharp eyes and hands rough from decades of ranch work. He looked more like her grandfather than her husband-to-be. The preacher began to speak, his voice echoing through the small chapel. Eliza's throat went dry as he reached the words. "Do you, Eliza Mayfield, take this man?" Before he could finish, the church doors burst open. A tall young man strode in, dusty, sunburned, with eyes as blue as a summer sky. The crowd gasped. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. It was Caleb, her childhood friend, the boy who had left years ago to seek fortune in the gold mines. She hadn't seen him since. "Eliza," he called, his voice cracking with emotion. "Don't do this. You can't marry him." Mr. Briggs turned sharply, his face darkening. "This is no place for you, boy." She made her choice. Caleb stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Eliza's. "No, she didn't. She's being forced into it. I know why you're doing this, Eliza. For your father. But there's another way." The crowd buzzed with whispers. The preacher hesitated. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. "Caleb," she whispered, "you don't understand. We don't have time." "My father." "I do understand," Caleb interrupted gently. "I've been saving. I struck gold last spring. Not much, but enough to help your family." For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Eliza's hands shook. Could it be true? Mr. Briggs slammed his cane on the floor. "You think you can just barge in here and ruin everything?" This girl gave her word. Eliza turned toward him, her fear melting into quiet strength. "I gave my word to save my father," she said firmly. "But I never gave my heart. And I never will." The old man's face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, girl. I'll see your family on the streets." Caleb stepped in front of her. "You'll do no such thing. You've taken enough from people who can't fight back." The crowd began murmuring in agreement. Mr. Briggs looked around. His influence was fading right before his eyes. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the church door behind him. Eliza stood frozen, tears falling freely now, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Caleb took her hand softly. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he whispered. "You're free." The preacher, still standing awkwardly at the front, cleared his throat. "Well, if the lady's no longer marrying Mr. Briggs, perhaps she needs a different groom." The crowd laughed softly, the tension broken. Eliza blushed, but she couldn't help smiling through her tears. Caleb smiled too, shy but sincere. "Not today," he said gently. "First, let's get your father well. Then, if she still wants me," he looked at her with hopeful eyes. "I'll ask again, the right way." That night, Eliza and Caleb rode together through the moonlit fields back to her small farmhouse. Her father lay weak but smiling when he saw them. Caleb handed over a small leather pouch, filled with gold dust. "It's not much," he said humbly, "but it'll pay for the medicine and more." Her father's eyes glistened. "You're a good man, son," he said softly. "I knew the Lord wouldn't abandon us." Weeks passed. The medicine worked, and Eliza's father began to recover. The rancher, Mr. Briggs, sold his land and left the town, too humiliated to stay. Life slowly returned to peace. Eliza helped Caleb fix up his small cabin near the river, and though they didn't talk about marriage right away, something warm and certain grew between them. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with gold and pink, Caleb stood beside Eliza outside the cabin. "You know," he said, "I still owe you a proposal." Eliza smiled softly, then asked. He knelt down, pulling out a small ring he'd carved himself from silver. "Eliza Mayfield," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I don't have a grand house or fine clothes. But I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face fear alone again. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes again, but this time, they were from joy. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times yes. When they married a few weeks later, it wasn't in a fancy church with a crowd of gossiping neighbors. It was by the river, under a canopy of wildflowers, with her father smiling proudly beside her. The same wind that once carried her sorrow now carried laughter. The girl who had once been forced into a loveless fate had rewritten her story, with courage, kindness, and a love that no amount of gold could ever buy. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eliza looked at Caleb and whispered, I thought my life was over that day in the church.